All right. In this part of the series, we will go through a small project where we can actually practice the different programming skills that we have learned so far in order to conduct a small data analysis. All right. And the data we will be handling in this project will be a school grade data. Okay. It's basically some tabular data consisting of 30 rows and 3 columns, as you can see in this depiction here. All right, so we have these columns, the student name, subject, and grade, and at each row we will have one instance of these values, right? So at the first row, for example, we have the student name James with the subject of biology and the grade 98. The second row we have Susan, math 63. Third row will be Laura, math 67. Okay, so it's basically some tabular data. All right. Now, the way I structured the data in this table is by using a Python dictionary. All right. Now, as we saw before, a dictionary is basically a collection consisting of key value pairs. It's the same as list. However, each element in the list is basically a key value pair, right? So in this case, in this school data dictionary, we have three key value pairs. The first key is student name, subject, and a grade. Now, the value corresponding to each key is not a single value, the same way we are used to, right? In this case, the value corresponding to each key is a whole list. So the first key value pair is student name as the key, colon, and then the value is a whole list consisting of the actual student names. Again, a list consisting of the actual student names. Now, the second key value pair is the key as subject, and the value is a whole list consisting of 30 subjects or subject instances. All right. The third key value pair, we have grade as the key, and this list of grades as the value corresponding to this key. All right. Now, we haven't seen this before, but it's completely possible, which is to interpolate lists inside dictionaries and dictionaries inside lists in order to basically represent more complex data that we might have we might encounter. All right. Now, the question is how can we access certain elements from this dictionary called school data? So, for example, how can we access this biology data value? How can we access this 94 grade or this Elizabeth student name, right? This is what we will be talking about soon. But before we get into that, remember that each instance at each index in this list represent one row in the table here. So for example, we have James with the subject of biology and the grade of 98, right? So here we have James in the list of the first key, right? Biology as the first value in the second list corresponding to the subject key, and 98 in the third list corresponding to the grade key. All right. Next, we have, for example, Susan, math, and 63. Here, as we can see, the second value of each list corresponding to one row. So, Susan, math, 63. Third, Laura, math, 67. As you can see here, Laura, third value math, and third value in third list is 67. All right. Now, in this data analysis, you will figure out how many unique students we have, how many unique subjects we have, and calculate different aggregates or metrics from this data. All right. Okay. Now, let's go back to the main point, which is how to access certain elements from this dictionary that is basically a mix of a list and a dictionary, right? So how can we access, for example, the subject, or sorry, the list corresponding to the subject key? It's very simple, the same way we did it before. All right, so we simply say school underscore data, the name of the dictionary. We open square brackets, and then we specify the key uh, uh, for which we want to get the value, right? So subject in this case, and that will simply return this list right here. So let's see, right? Let's name it val and store it inside the variable called val and print val. Let's see. As we can see here in the output, we have a list of 30 items corresponding to the key subject, which is basically this list right here. All right. What if we wanted to obtain the list of grades here? We simply reference the grade key rather than the subject. So we say grade. Let's see. And as we can see, we obtained the whole list of grades. All right. Now val, right, is basically a list. And in order to verify that, we can use the built-in type function in Python, right? So we can say print type of val to get the data type of this object. Let's see. As we can see, the class is list, and we have discussed how every entity in Python is basically an object of a certain class. This is very, very important to understand, right? In this case, we are dealing with a list, which is an object of the class list. All right, now that we have a list, means that we can access the items in that list using, remember, the index number. Again, the index number, right? We access elements in a dictionary using the keys, whereas we access elements in a list using the index number, or simply the index, right? So, for example, in this list of grades, how can we access the 99 value? We simply reference its index in that list, in the val list, right? Starting from 0 for 98, 1 for 63, 2 for 67, and 3 for 99, right? So we simply say val of what? 3. And we are expected to get the value 99 in the output. Let's see. As we can see here, the value is 99. Okay. Now, what if we change the val to the list of subjects, for example? Subject is the key, right? And we executed it. As we can see, we got biology. 0 for biology, 1 for math, 2 for math, and 3 for biology. So basically, we are getting uh, 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 some data points for the row consisting of Linda as the student name biology and 99 for the grade. All right? I hope this makes sense. Now, a shorthand way to get the same output we have gotten is to simply follow this list access here with the index number, since we are dealing with a list, saying, for example, 3. Let's change this, or let's keep it subject, all right? At this point, we can simply print out val, right? Let's see, we get the same result. So rather than put it in a new line, Python will automatically first obtain the list using this key subject. All right. Now that the list is ready, it will evaluate the next part, which is the index. So it will first access the list corresponding to that key, and then access the element corresponding to that index. Okay. You can do it in multiple lines, or you can serialize the keys and the indices in the same statement. All right. Okay. Now, there are cases where we might have dictionaries inside lists, and that's completely fine, right? We can put lists inside dictionaries and we can put dictionaries inside lists. So after 98, we can open a dictionary. We can start defining some key value pairs. For example, saying A1 and key B is 2, right? Now, since we have 30, now we have 31 elements, the index of the last element will be 30, right? So if we said school data of grade at index 30, we are expected to get this dictionary here. And this is what we got, right? The dictionary corresponding to the last element in the grade list, which is a whole dictionary. Now, how can we get any element inside the dictionary? By again referencing the key. So we open square brackets and we mention the key we want to obtain the value of, right? So let's say B. What is the value expected or the output expected? The value will be 2. Let's see. As you can see, 2. So the takeaway here simply is that whenever we want to access an element in a dictionary, or whenever we are inside a dictionary, we use keys. Whenever we are inside a list, we use indices. Okay, and sometimes the structure can be tree-like, right? Where you need to traverse or navigate through the list of dictionaries and lists, all right, to get to a particular element of interest, all right, because they are inside each other. It's a list inside the dictionary, inside a list inside the dictionary. So you need to dig deep or dive through these data structures to get the element of interest again. Okay, all right, awesome. Another point to consider is the way we can actually loop through a list. Okay, so let's assume that we want to loop through the grid list. The way we have discussed before is simply using a for loop, right? So we say for the keyword, the iterator, name it anything, right? In how can we access the list corresponding to the grade, for example, to the grade key? We say school data, the name of the dictionary, followed by square brackets. We open quotations and we say grade. Now this is the list we want to loop through, right? Now let's put this in a separate variable, saying, for example, my list, right? So my list is equal to this list right here, and then here say my list. Okay, now we place a colon, we go to a new line, and then we can print, for example, the anything variable, which is basically a variable that stores each element of the list at each iteration until we get to the end of the list. So let's print out the elements here, as we can see. Okay, let's delete this dictionary since we don't need it anymore. All right, let's clean up our output terminal and rerun the code. As we can see, we have looped through the list of grades and printed out all the elements. All right. Now, another way to access the elements in the list is by their index numbers, right? So this is an easier way to do it, but sometimes we need to access the elements of the list through their index numbers. All right. Now, we can say here, for example, index list, right? And depending on the number of the list we need to loop through, we create a list of indexes or index numbers. So since we have in this list 30 items, then we create the index 0, 1, 2, all the way to 29. All right. So say something like this: 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 29. Okay. Now let's take as an example a small list before we get into the bigger list. Say, for example, test list is equal to 3, 5, 12, and 100. right? And we want to loop through this list. Now we have 4 elements, right? And their index numbers are 0, 1, 2, 3. So our index list will be 0, 1, 2, 3. Now we can loop through this index list, and at each iteration we access an element from test list at the current index we are looping through. This might seem a little complex when I explained it, but let's see it in action in order to clarify it further. So we say for, let's name this index, in the index list, right? And then we print what? We access an element from this list, all right? Now, what is the index we want to access? It will be index. So at first iteration, index will be equal to 0, right? So now we are accessing test list of 0, which will print out the element 3, right? Next, index will be updated automatically by Python since it's a loop to the value of 1. And then we will print test list of 1, which will get the value 5. And the same go to 12 and then 100, right? Let's test this and see. As you can see, 3, 5, 12, and 100, right? What if we looped through only the index list, right? So we only want to print out the index. What is the expected output? Let's see. 0, 1, 2, 3, because we are just looping it through this list. But what we did before is that we looped through this list, but we didn't access the index in this list. We accessed an element from this list depending on the current index in the list we are looping through, right? With practice, it would make much more sense, all right? Now, assuming that we had, rather than 4 elements in the list we want to loop through the index method, all right, we had 100. Are you going to create an index list consisting of 100 indexes from 0 to 99? Now this will take so much time, and it's considered very inefficient way to do that, right? So another way to do it is to use a built-in function in Python called the range function, right? So it's called the range function. Since it's a function, we follow it with parentheses, right? And now we specify the number or the size of the list we want. So range of 4 will return a list from 0 to 3. So 0, 1, 2, 3. Range of 10, it will return a list from 0 to 9, right? Okay, now since we have 4 elements in our test list here, then we need only range of 4 to return 0, 1, 2, 3 as the index list, right? Now we can go back to our loop through the index list, and at each print statement, we say print what? Test list of index, and see if we will get the same result as before. As we can see, we got a 3, 5, 12, and 100. So we simply use the built-in range function to return the index list. And please keep in mind that the range function is very, very helpful function in so many cases. All right, especially if we want to loop through 2 lists, or we want to obtain elements from 2 lists at the same loop. Okay, we will take an example in a minute. But for now, just remember that the range function is a very helpful function. All right, now let's apply the range function to obtain the list of grades, or to loop through the list of grades through their indices or indexes, right? So let's delete this test list and say range of 30 to obtain the index list from 0 to 29. Now we want to loop through my list, right? So my list of index, right? Please take a look at each statement and really understand it. Don't memorize anything, just really understand what we are doing in order to be able to write similar code when you need it in the future. So let's print out the output here. As we can see, we have managed to get all the elements at the different indices or indexes. Okay, now When can this be helpful? Again, when we want to access elements from multiple lists at the same loop or in the same loop. So say we want to get the subject and the grade at the same time in the loop. How can we do that? We simply, in our print statement, or before that, we obtain the list of subjects, right? My list equals school data, right? And the key is subject in this case. All right, so my list 1 and my list 2. All right, now rather than just printing out my list 1, which is the grade of index, we can also print, all right, an element from my list 2 of index, which will get us the grade and the subject at the same time. All right, now let's test this code and see the results that we will get. New line, rerun. As we can see here, at each iteration we got the grade and the subject corresponding to it. A grade 63 and the subject corresponding to it. 67 math. Here, look here. 67 as the grade and math. I mean, it should have been the other way around. First the subject and then the grade, if we wanted to make more sense. Let's do that. All right. So this is basically 2 and this is 1. Let's see here. To new output. There you go. See, biology 98, math 63, math 67, etc., etc. All right. And we can do the same thing to access the list elements in the student name list. All right. Okay, great. Now, uh, with what we have explained, let's go through some of the tasks that we need to work on in this project, or the different data analysis that we need to work on in this project. For example, the first requirement is to get how many unique students are there and who are they. All right. Second is what is the lowest math grade? What is the lowest biology grade? What is the lowest art grade? All right. Calculate Susan's GPA. It's one of the students in the list. Calculate David's GPA. Which student had the highest math grade? How many students get an A, B, C, D, and F grade? All right, given the current scale right here. Okay. Now, we will go through the first 2 tasks, do them together, following the approach that we have learned before, right? And then I will leave it to you to work on the remaining tasks on your own, keeping in mind that I will share with you the resolved or the solved version of this project so that you can refer to it after you finish working on it on your own. All right. So first task here is to get how many unique students are there and who are they. All right. Now let's follow the approach we have learned in the last tutorial, which is first to write any program or function or any task, programming task. We need to first identify the goal of the program we need to write, right? Second, we will write the steps we need to go through or the action plan in our own language. All right. Third, we simply translate the steps of the action plan into the programming language that we are using. So let's start. How many unique students are there and who are they? All right. Now, the first step is to create a counter variable to store the number of unique students, right? And then we will create an empty list to store the unique students that we are going to search for in the original data. Okay, so let's write them down. Keeping in mind that we use the pound sign in order to write comments. So first, create counter variable. Second, we create empty unique list for students. Okay. Third, with a new line. What are we going to do in the third step? We will loop through the student names, right? Student names, and check at each iteration if that student is already in the unique list of students or not. If he or she wasn't, then we are going to append that student to the list. Otherwise, we will simply ignore the current students at the current iteration. So we loop through student names, right? Check if a student already exists. If not, add the student to the list. Or in other words, uList, since it's the name of the list we will create, right? And then we are going to increase the counter of the unique students by 1 in order to keep track of the number of unique students, right? So we say increase counter by 1, right? And then we can simply print out the results. All right. So we have identified the goal at the beginning, which is how many unique students and who are they. This is basically a composite goal that we need to work on. Second, we identified the steps we need to go through. Now we can translate these steps into a working code. All right, so we start with the counter variable. So we say counter is equal to 0, right? Next, create an empty uList for students. So we say uList unique, let's say names list is initially empty, using an empty pair of square brackets in this case. All right, now loop through the student names or the student names list, in other words, right? So we say for, and then we create the iterator variable in this case. So for example, x, and then the n keyword, and then the list we want to loop through. What is the list we want to loop through? Let's take a look at our original data. It's the list of student names. How can we obtain that? By first referencing the name of the dictionary followed by the key we are interested in, which is student name or stu name. So we say for x in school data of stu name. All right. We place a colon, go to a new line. Now we are inside what? We are inside the body of this loop, right? Now let's go to this comment, and we want to make a condition to again check if the student we are currently handling at the current loop, okay, which is contained in variable x, is already in the list called uNames list. If it wasn't, then we are going to add it. All right, and for that, all right, there is a special operator just like the plus or minus or division or multiplication or any other operator called the not in operator. It's a membership operator, all right? We have the in operator and we have the not in operator, okay? Again, you can refer to the documentation, the official documentation, to see how this operator actually works. So we would say if x not in the unames list. Sorry, let's copy it, not in the unames list. If so, we will go ahead, right? Let's take this comment here, go ahead and increase the counter by 1, saying counter equals counter plus 1. All right. Another step that we have missed, as you can see, is to add or append the current student we are handling to the unique names list. So add student to, we called it ulist, but in fact we called it unique names list, to unique names list. All right, to do that, we can use a method within the list class called append. All right, as we have discussed before, lists and dictionaries are classes from which we can instantiate objects. Therefore, there are so many methods and attributes we can access for these objects, right? One helpful method in this case is called the append method. So we say unique names list dot append. It's a method and therefore it's a function, so we follow it with parentheses. Now what do we want to append in this case? X, which will contain the uh, uh, which will contain basically the student name, right? Okay, and finally, after the loop is done, right, we will print out the results here. Okay, print out the results. What do you want to print? We want to print the counter, which is basically the number of unique students and the actual unique students in the list. So let's do that. Print. Let's leave this comment here, right? Print counter, right? Comma. Let's go to a new line, right? Using this escape character, comma to print out a third variable, which will be the unames list. All right, let's take a look at final look at our code here. We create the counter. We have the unique names list. We looped it through the list. If the item is not in the list, right, we're going to increase the counter. We're going to append the item. And finally, after the loop is done, we will print out the counter and the unique names list. All right, is there anything else here? No, let's maximize our terminal screen and print out the result. All right, we've gotten 0 for the counter and all the unique results or the unique students. But why did we get 0? It simply means that this counter here hasn't been increasing. So let's see why. Well, let's rerun first to make sure nothing had happened. All right, nothing. All right, so let's see counter. All right, as we can see here, we said counter plus 1. So say counter equals counter plus 1. All right, let's rerun the code. As we can see, we have 10 unique students: James, Susan, Laura, Linda, Elizabeth, David, Stephen, Bob, Daniel, and Michael. All right, as you can see, we have run into an issue or an error. It's not basically an error, it's an unexpected result, right? And we can fix these issues by basically reinvestigating the code. And this is going to happen a lot, right? So expect to make mistakes at times and expect to spend some time resolving these issues. All right, so that was it for the first task here. Right now, let's work on the second task at hand. Okay, the next task is what is the lowest math grade? And use the built-in function min for that. Okay, now let's take a look again at our data here. And specifically, let's look at the grade list. Okay, now would it work to simply get the minimum from this list? I mean, just use the minimum function, for example, or loop through the values and calculate the minimum value. That wouldn't work, right? Because we don't know to which subject each grade belong, right? So for example, what does 86 belong to? We don't know, right? Therefore, we need to keep track of both the subject list and the grade list at the same time in order to be able to pair the, each subject with its corresponding grade, right? So here 98 by itself is useless. However, 98 with biology is useful, right? Same thing, 63, we don't know to which subject it belongs, but 63 with math is useful, and so on and so forth. Therefore, in order to isolate the math grades, then we need to work on both lists, the subject and the grade, at the same time to again be able to pair the proper grade with the proper subject. Okay, now uh, let's first write down the steps that we need to go through. So first, the goal is very clear in this case. What is the lowest math grade? Very obvious. Now, the steps. The first step is to get the subject list. Subject list. Okay. Second, we want to also get the grades list. All right. Third, let's go to sorry. Oh, all right. We want to create an empty list, all right, of or an empty list to add the math grades to it. And from that, we will be able to calculate the minimum value in that list, right? So create an empty math grades list. All right. Next, I don't know why this keeps happening, but it's fine. Loop through an index list of 29 elements. Why did we do that? Again, because we want to keep track of two lists at the same time, just like we learned at the beginning of this session, right? All right, now at each iteration of the loop, we want to check if the current item in the subject list, right, is math. If so, if the previous condition was true, add the current grade from the grade list to what? The math grades list. Math grades list. Okay. At that point, finally, we can simply print out the results to make sure that we have obtained what we wished for. Results. All right, we have defined the goal, we have defined the steps. Now let's continue and translate these steps into working code. All right, get the subject list. So we create a variable called subject list and we set it equal to school data dictionary square brackets, and what key are we interested in? The subject key. Let's copy this statement to get the grades list as well, but change the key to grade. Make sure always to specify the correct key. Okay, if you said the school date of grades, then you will get a syntax error. So you need to specify the correct key according to the dictionary that you have defined at the beginning. All right. Next, create an empty math grades list. So let's say math grades is equal to an empty list. How do we create an empty list? By just leaving a pair of square brackets. How do we create an empty dictionary? We leave a pair of curly brackets. It's that simple. All right, now loop through an index list of 29 elements. All right, so it's a loop. So we have a for loop. For, let's name my index, right? Or simply index, right? In a list of 29 elements. How can we create that? Remember, using the range function. Range of 30, which will return a list from 0 to 29. All right, at each part of the loop, we go to a new line, right? Now check if the current item in the subject list is math. All right, let's do that first. Let's make sure we are using the correct indentation. We do. So we say if the subject list of index, okay, is equal to which value? Math, right? Then we will go ahead and do what? Append the current grade at the current index from the math grades list. To which list? To the grades list. How? Like this. So we say math grades dot, again, it's an object, so we say append, open parentheses, and say grades list. What's the name of the list again? All right, we didn't name it correctly. It is grades list, right? Let's copy the name, append grades list. Now, which item do you want to append? The one at the current index. What is the index? It's called index. Okay, now we are done. We have looped, we have checked the condition. If it was confirmed, then we appended the value. So let's go ahead and print out the results to make sure that we have gotten what we expected. So we want to print out the math grades, right? And as another value to print, we will apply the built-in min function, right? And pass a complete list as an argument or as an input, right? Saying math grades. So we want to get all the math grades and then print out the minimum in that list. Okay, let's first comment out this print statement so that it doesn't affect anything. Let's clean our terminal and run the code. Let's see. All right, this is character supposed to be this way. Clean, rerun. As you can see, here is the list of the math grades 63, 67, 86, all the way to 92, and the minimum value is 63, which is clearly is the actual minimum in the list, right? Now keep in mind that there are multiple ways to achieve the same result. Okay, you could have obtained the minimum by creating a minimum function, for example, with multiple statements to get the minimum, and that's completely fine. However, it's much preferable to tap into the different built-in functions within Python in order to expedite the process of your code development and to minimize the number of errors and to increase the efficiency as well, because these functions or built-in functions were actually written by experienced programmers. Okay, so in this case, we simply use them in function to get the minimum of these grades. All right. Now we are done with these two tasks. Again, I will leave it to you to go through the remaining tasks, like getting the lowest biology grade, lowest art grade, calculating the Susan's GPA, David's GPA, all the way till the end. And if you manage to go through all the tasks correctly and you've gotten the correct results, then you can consider yourself to have scored a real achievement in your progress in this field. All right, awesome. As I mentioned before, uh, I will attach or append the unsolved version of this project along with the solved version, but I completely recommend to only look at the solved version after you have given up on a specific task, or after you have completed the project successfully and you want it just to make sure that the results do match. Okay. All right, that was it for this tutorial. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.